Hello, Alex Sasser here, hosting another episode of Touching Lives with Dr. James Merritt. Today's message is coming up, but first let me share with you a few updates about our ministry. The annual Mountaintop Conference in beautiful Pigeon Forge, Tennessee is scheduled for September 30th through October 2nd. Go to mountaintopconference.com for more information and to book your tickets. Next, be sure to download the free Touching Lives mobile app on your smartphone where you can watch Dr. Merritt's sermons, read daily devotionals, and study the Bible anytime, anywhere. Simply search for Touching Lives in the App Store to find the app. And finally, if you ever have any prayer needs, be sure to call our help center at 800-413-1131 or go to our prayer wall on our website at touchinglives.org to leave your request there. Thank you for joining us today. And now here's today's sermon from Dr. James Merritt.
Every time I think about meeting the girl of my dreams and proposing to her, believe it or not, on the second date, the girl that I've been married to now for over 43 years, every time I think about that magic moment, I think about two words: lifetime opportunity. Because I don't mind telling you, the first time I ever laid eyes on my beautiful Teresa, I thought to myself, if I can just catch this fish, I'm not putting any more bait in the water. And literally, I looked at Teresa and I thought, she is the opportunity of a lifetime. And we all have those times in our life when we either have had or we do get what we consider a lifetime opportunity, kind of one of those once-in-a-lifetime deals. It may be an investment, it may be a job, it may be a place to travel, it may be an opportunity to go somewhere, do something, or meet someone that you somehow realize, if I don't do this now, if I don't go there now, if I don't buy this now, if I don't try this now, I will never get the chance to do it again. And I believe we all have a lifetime opportunity every day. And you know what that is? It's life itself. Think about this. Every single day of your life is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Today, this day, right now, is an opportunity that will never pass your way again. Today's not yesterday. It cannot be tomorrow. And every one of us are given in this lifetime opportunities to find God's will and to do God's work. We're given opportunities to make a difference in the lives of other people. As a matter of fact, from God's perspective, life is an equal opportunity adventure. God doesn't discriminate. He wants all of us to make the most of life that we possibly can. And one of the ways that we can do that, and I think one of the most important character qualities we'll ever develop in this life, if you want to maximize this life and live it to the fullest, is something that's missing a lot today in our culture, in our communities, and in our country. It's what's called faithfulness. If you are a boss or a supervisor, you've got anybody under you, you do with volunteers, you've got anybody who answers to you, anybody you're counting on, then you know something. It's just hard to find people who are just faithful, who'll just show up, who'll be where they need to be when they need to be there, and who'll do what they need to do when they need to do it. Faithful to give a good day's wage of work for a good day's wage. Faithful to stay until the job is done. Faithful to do what they do with a good attitude. The wisest man who ever lived, his name was Solomon. He wrote these words. He asked a great question in Proverbs 20. He said, many claim to have unfailing love, but a faithful person who can find? What he said was, people who talk the talk, they're a dime a dozen. People who walk the walk, they are hard to find. And yet, think about it, when it comes down to it, have you ever thought about how dependent we all are every day of our life on somebody being faithful? For example, a government is absolutely dependent on its citizens to obey the law. An army is dependent on its soldiers to be faithful to carry out their duty. I can tell you as a pastor, a church is totally dependent on its people to be faithful to serve and to give. Every day, our eternal destiny depends upon God being faithful to His promises and God being faithful to His word. There's a great verse in a book called Lamentations that says this: because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. And then He said this: great is your faithfulness. Well, today we're going to be looking at a parable that Jesus told in the first gospel ever written, the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew chapter 25. And there's a parable that he told that illustrates just how important faithfulness really is. And here's what I want you to take away today. Faithfulness is living up to 5 words in every situation. You can count on me. Can your wife or your husband always count on you? Can your children always count on you? Can your pastor and your church always count on you? Can your employee or your boss always count on you? How do you become a faithful person? How do you bear the fruit of faithfulness? Let me tell you 3 things to do. Number 1, take stock of my God-given ability. Take stock of my God-given ability. We're in Matthew 25. Listen to what Jesus said. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The first thing I want you to notice is that every person in this parable has been given talents. Now, one person has been given 5, one person had been given 2, another person had been given 1, but everybody had at least 1. No, not everybody had been given equal gifts, but everyone had been given gifts equally. We all don't have equal gifts. Some people are more gifted than others. Some people have more gifts than others. But we are all gifted. And both of those facts are very important because on the one hand, what makes your abilities just as important as someone else's, even though they may not seem to be as equal or the same, is that your ability is a gift from God just like everybody else. Yeah, there are some people that are more gifted than I am. There are pastors that have more abilities than I do. But they're not any more important than I am because all of our gifts are equally God-given. And even though some in this parable had been given talents, they'd not all been given the same talents. And even though this particular talent refers to money, in the parable, what Jesus is obviously referring to is not just money, he's talking about abilities. As a matter of fact, verse 15 tells us that these talents were given each according to his ability. So you say, well, what do you mean by talent? Let me make sure you understand what a talent is. A talent is an opportunity to use your God-given ability for God's glory. That's what a talent is. It's your opportunity, which we all have, to use your God-given ability, which we all have, for God's glory. Now, as you're going to see in a moment, how many talents you have are really irrelevant. Because what you're going to see in the story is the master expected just as much from the man with 5 talents as with the man with 1 talent. And expected just as much from the man with 1 talent as he did from the 5-talent person. So I want you to take a moment right now and do something I want to do. Take stock of the abilities that God's given you. Maybe you have the ability to cook, the ability to sing, the ability to sew, the ability to play sports, the ability to play a musical instrument, the ability to relate to children, the ability to connect with teenagers, the ability just to wave a hand and give a friendly smile and people just flock to you. That's all right. Here's the principle. It's not how much you have that matters to God. It's what you do with what you have that matters to God. No, we don't all have equal abilities and we never will have. But we all have the same opportunity to use that ability, that God-given ability, for the glory of God. And by the way, your opportunity will never exceed your ability, but your ability will always be equal to your opportunity. And what this parable is going to teach us is, even though every person had been given different abilities, that each been given the same responsibility to take that opportunity, to use that ability for the good of the masters. What is inexcusable, what you cannot defend before God, is just sticking your ability in your pocket and not using it at all. I heard about a man who came home from work one night, and his wife was standing at the door and her arms were crossed. She's just looking so mean and upset. He said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Do you know what day it is?" He said, "Well, sure I do. This is our 25th wedding anniversary." She said, "Well, did you buy me a present?" He said, "Well, I did." She said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, it's something that took a lot of thought, something that I think is very useful, something I think you'll like." She said, "Well, what could that be?" He said, "Well, I bought you a burial plot in Highland Memorial Park." She said, "You're kidding." He said, "Wait a minute. The cemetery is beautiful. The bronze markers are placed even with the surface of the earth. They always keep it perfectly manicured. And I feel like you deserve the best burial plot that money can buy. Well, the wife at least had to agree, you did remember my anniversary. Thanks for the gift. 1 year later, they're sitting at the breakfast table having a cup of coffee. All of a sudden, she looks at her husband. She said, do you know what today is? He said, of course I do. This is our 26th wedding anniversary. She said, did you buy me a gift? He said, buy you a gift? You didn't use the gift I gave you last year. Now listen, this is the question I want you to ask yourself right now. What God-given abilities do you have? Next question, how are you using those abilities for the glory of God and the good of others? Even more specifically, here's this question. How are you serving God's church, God's people, with the abilities that you have? So take stock of your God-given ability. Number 2, take advantage of your God-given opportunity. Take advantage of your God-given opportunity. Now, in order to understand the parable, you've got to understand the symbolism, because a lot of it's obvious, right? So who do you think the master in the story is? That's Jesus. Pretty easy to figure that out. The servants in the story, who is that? That represents followers of Jesus. So the truth of the parable is pretty evident, right? The Lord has given gifts and abilities to all of his followers, and he expects every one of them to leverage those abilities in such a way that he is honored and other people are blessed. So let me put it to you this way. Every ability that you have comes with the expectation that that ability will be used when the opportunity presents itself. Every opportunity carries with it a responsibility to use the ability in such a way that God is glorified and others are blessed. Now you may be asking the question, okay, why does Jesus talk about money? Why does he use the example of money? Well, because money really is a pretty good picture of your talents. As a matter of fact, the Greek word talenton actually gives us the word for talented or talents. Jesus is teaching us your abilities are kind of just like money. They are to be reinvested. So the story continues. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work, and he gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now, 2 things stand out immediately, okay? On the one hand, every servant had been given an equal opportunity to leverage his money, to invest his money. They didn't all have the same amount. That's not the point. They all had the same opportunity to leverage that money, to invest their money and get a return on the money. The other thing is, there are only 2 kinds of servants in this story: faithful and foolish. Now, I want you to think about how you're serving God right now. How you're serving God, for example, in your church. How you're serving God where you work. How you're serving God in your everyday life. And so I want you to be honest. Would you say you're more faithful, or would you say that you're more foolish? Because here's the truth of the matter. You're either doing something for God every day, or you're doing nothing for God every day. There is no in between. And I want you to notice that God did not expect, this is important, he did not expect the same results from every servant. He did expect the same effort. So this is something that you need to hear and I need to hear. We both need to hear. God never compares you with anyone else. God compares you with you. That's it. God measures your success by how much you do compared to what you could do. How you are and what you are and how much you are compared to what you could be. One of my heroes was the great basketball coach, John Wooden, greatest, I think, basketball coach who ever lived. Won more national championships than any basketball coach in history. When Coach Wooden was a senior in high school, his team lost the state championship by 1 point. And the only member of that team that didn't cry his eyes out after that loss was Coach Wooden. So when someone asked him why he wasn't crying, even though he's greatly disappointed, he gave a simple answer. Because he said, I played the best that I could. I gave it all that I had. When John Wooden got home that night, his father put his arm around him. He called him Johnny. He said, Johnny, he said, I want you to remember something. And he told him this poem that Coach Wooden instantly put to memory. You're going to be better than some, and some are going to be better than you. But you should never accept the fact that you didn't make the effort to do the best that you can do. I got a book in my library that a pastor dedicated to his people, and what he wrote so touched me, and it so inspired me that I want to share it with you. And if you're a pastor watching right now, I want you to really listen to this. I dedicate this book with indescribable gratitude to the faithful church member, that wonderful person whose praises go so largely unsung, but without whose regular attendance, constant dependability, faithful intercession, lasting affection, and unstinted generosity in the giving of time, money, and strength, the work of the pastor would not be possible. It almost makes me want to clap for the pastor that wrote that, because I don't know of many problems in life that could not be solved in any area of life if we would just step up and say to the God that made us and to the people that may be involved with us, you can count on me to be faithful. I'll do what I need to do. I will be where I need to be, and I'll be there when I need to be there. You know, a marriage can make it. It really can, if you'll just stay faithful to your vows, faithful to love each other the way God commands you. Any church can withstand any outside attack from the world or the devil if that church will just be faithful to love each other, pray for each other, and work with each other. We can do everything we ever need to do financially in this church or your church or any church through all churches for this world if every church member would just say, for the rest of my life, every single day, I am going to be faithful to God. I'm going to be faithful to give God His tithe. I'm going to give faithful to give my church my time. I'm going to give faithful to give God's work my talents. We could do unbelievable things. It's just a matter of being faithful. And then there's a third thing that Jesus teaches in this parable. And that is, take note of our God-given accountability. Take stock of our God-given ability. Take notice of our God-given opportunity. Take advantage. But take note of our God-given accountability. Now, the way this story unfolds kind of makes me laugh and kind of cry at the same time. Listen to this. So after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and they settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Now, once again, the point is driven home. Ready? It is not what gifts you are given or how many gifts you have. It is what you do with the gifts that you have that really count. That is why, whether you are a 5-talent person or you're just a 2-talent person, that's why they both receive the same proportional reward. God was not concerned with who started with the most talents. God was not concerned with who wound up with the most talents. What God was concerned with, what did each person do with the talents that they had? That's all that counts. You do what you can with what you have. Yet at the same time, what's really strange is that the emphasis on the parable is not on the servants who were faithful. You think that's where the real punchline would be. That's not the point of the parable. The point of the parable is not on the servants who were faithful. The point of the parable is on the servants who were, that servant that was not faithful. Because notice how he responds. Then the man who received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. Now, what did this guy do? He had so much initiative, so much drive, so much ambition, so much of a sense of personal responsibility, he buries his talent. Doesn't even put it in the bank. Doesn't even try to draw any interest. And oh, by the way, he could have. Because back in that day, the ancient Roman Empire had a banking system that was in many respects like banks of today. And you could actually go and you could deposit money in that bank and you would earn interest on that deposit. As a matter of fact, it worked out to about 6%. So this person could have just simply gone to one of those Roman banks and he could have made 6% on his money, but he didn't do anything. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I think the same thing every time I read the parable. You go, how lazy, how apathetic, how foolish. And yet, I look out at people sitting in front of me every week in my church, and what do I see? I see buried talent everywhere. I see buried talent of singing. I see buried talent of teaching. I see buried talent of serving. I see buried talent of working all over our church. Now, before you try to give me an excuse as to, why you don't serve and why you don't do it, I've heard them all, by the way. I got a big file cabinet. I know you're too busy. You got too many outside interests. You got a lake house. You got a house at the beach. You got involved in too many other things. Jesus closes with the truth. He drives home with a sledgehammer. And Jesus is going to tell us there is simply no excuse for not doing what you can with what you have. Listen to what he says. His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest." Now, I want you to listen to what this slave does. Are you ready for this? He not only doesn't do anything with the talents he was given, with the money he was given, he tries to pass the blame off on his master. In other words, he gives this excuse. And notice what the master said. The master said, "Look, if you thought I would demand a return on what does not belong to me, do you not realize I would definitely require a return on that which does belong to me?" I mean, how foolish can you be? And the only one of those servants who gave an excuse, this is what's interesting. The only one who ever gave an excuse was the person who did nothing. By the way, while I'm in the neighborhood, Adrian Rogers used to say an excuse is just the skin of a reason stuffed with a lie. You know who primarily makes excuses in life? People who don't do anything. I've never met anybody that tried their best, did their hardest, even if they failed, who made an excuse. And nothing irritates me more when I look at people who show no results, who get nothing done, and then they blame everybody else. They make excuses. As a matter of fact, the only people I know in life who make excuses are the people who have nothing to show for their time and their work, but they love to point out why everyone else is the reason. So it's interesting that when Jesus asked these two faithful servants what they did with their talents, they said, "Well, we just took the talents that you gave us and we just made more talents." The unfaithful servant took 44 words to say, "I didn't do anything." And I want you to remember something that I have learned, and I've learned it with even the staff people that I work with. I've learned it with people that I work with. The less people do, the more people talk. The less people do, the more people talk. Now, I want you to notice something in verses 21 and 23. The master says to both of those servants, listen to what he says, "You have been faithful with a few things." Now, what's wrong with a lot of people is this. They think they're too good for the small things. I've worked with people, big picture people. They got all these big grandiose plans they're going to do. But then when you examine them after a while, they haven't even done little things. The great poet Longfellow once said, most people would succeed in small things if they weren't troubled with great ambition. One of my favorite stories is about a man that was talking to this big, tall, husky football player. And he looked at him and he said, you know what? He's looking up at him and he said, if I was big and tall and strong as you are, you know what I'd do? And he said, no, what would you do? He said, I'd go out in the woods, I'd find the biggest bear I could find, and I'd wrestle him right down to the ground. That big old football player looked down at that guy and he said, well, you know, there are a lot of little bears in the woods. Now, I just want to say it again. We just need to be faithful in what God has given us. So let me kind of bring all of this to a close with this last question. You're a follower of Jesus. You have trusted Christ as your Lord and Savior. Simple question. Be honest. Would you say that Jesus Christ made a good investment when He saved you? Would you say Jesus Christ made a good investment when He saved you? I mean, how would you feel if you went to a bank and opened up a savings account, you put $1,000 in that account, and at the end of that 10 years, you went back to collect your money, and all you had was $1,000? What if a banker told you he didn't even put your money in an interest-bearing CD? He just went out back and buried it. Well, you'd be livid. How do you think God feels when He gives you the gifts that you have, the abilities that you have right out of His hand, and you fail to invest them for His glory? Or you waste them on something that doesn't mean anything in eternity? There's an amazing book. It's entitled The Fall of Fortresses. And it tells the remarkable story of a B-17 flying fortress that flew a bombing mission over Germany toward the end of World War II. Well, the bomber took several direct hits from Nazi anti-aircraft guns, and even a few of them hit the fuel tank, but none of them exploded. Well, after the plane finally landed, they found 11 unexploded 20-millimeter shells that had been carefully removed from the bomber's fuel tank. They couldn't believe it. Every one of them was dismantled. They were wondering, why didn't these bombs go off? What happened? They couldn't understand it. Why would the Germans fire empty shells? And the mystery was solved when a small note was found in one of those bombs. It was written in Czechoslovakian and translated, this is what it said. Listen to this. This is all we can do for you now. Here's the amazing story. A member of the Czech underground working in a Nazi ammunitions factory had deliberately omitted the explosives in at least 11 of the shells on his assembly line. Not knowing if any of the efforts would prove effective, he slipped a note into one of the shells, hoping maybe somebody will open this shell, maybe somebody will benefit from my efforts, maybe somebody out there will know I was faithful. That same person may well have died wondering if that little work he was doing to subvert the enemy would ever make any difference. Didn't matter. He did what little that he could, taking what little that he had. He exercised his responsibility to take his opportunity, to use the ability he had for the good of someone else. And because of that, he saved the lives of an entire crew on a B-17 bomber. I've received a lot of compliments in my life. Frankly, the vast majority I really didn't deserve. But I want to tell you there's one compliment that wouldn't just make my life, if I could just hear it one time, it would make my eternity. And you know what it is? If I can just hear Jesus say to me, well done, good and faithful servant. Every day is a lifetime opportunity to simply say both to God above and to the world around, you can count on me. Be faithful.
We are so glad you tuned in here on the Touching Lives digital channel, and we hope you enjoyed the sermon today. Be sure to click and follow this page and feel free to leave any comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts from today's message. Look for a new episode to be posted on this channel each Sunday. In the meantime, check out our free resources at touchinglives.org and feel free to call us at 800-413-1131 with prayer needs or questions. Thank you so much for watching today. I'll see you right here next time for another episode of Touching Lives with Dr. James Merritt.
Touching Lives, teaching people everywhere who Jesus is and why they need Him. This program is sponsored by Touching Lives Ministries and is made possible by the grace of God and your faithful prayers and gifts.